Live from Washington, D.C., Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. And now, Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, Sekulow.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the broadcast. And I think this is important to understand. Mike Pompeo, our Secretary of State, went to Cairo. Remember, it was President Obama went to Cairo. I'll play some of that speech in a moment. The famous line from that speech, of course, the Cairo speech was the whole issue about we're not in a battle with radical Islam and the issues of terrorism. Well, Mike Pompeo made a completely different statement today and said the policies of the previous administration really brought havoc to the region. But this is what he opened with. In just 24 months, the United States under President Trump has asserted its traditional role as a force for good in this region because we've learned from our mistakes. We've rediscovered our voice. We have rebuilt our relationship. We have rejected false overtures from enemies. And that was directed at Iran. Very, very specific.
Yes, very specific to the Iran move by the Obama administration and reasserting that we are, this is a different day and age, a different United States of America foreign policy, where we stand with our friends like the Egyptian president al-Sisi, who's been combating radical Islamic terrorism. I mean, the fact is that he gets applause when and this is interesting in the Islamic world, but he gets applause when he praises the Egyptian president al-Sisi for trying to vanquish the forces of terrorism and conquer extremism. This is when he uses the term radical Islamism, and he gets applause in Egypt. Take a listen, bite 12.
And look at what we've accomplished. Look at what we've accomplished together. Under new leadership, America has confronted the ugly reality of radical Islamism. On President Trump's very first trip abroad to this region, he called on Muslim-majority nations to, quote, meet history's greatest test, to conquer extremism and vanquish the forces of terrorism. President Sisi joined us. He joined us in denouncing the twisted ideology which has brought death and suffering on so many. I thank President Sisi for his courage.
That alone, I mean, that statement alone, Andy, when I think about it, and we deal with this region of the world a lot. We have an office in Jerusalem. We've been in this region and doing work there for a long time. But finally that we're acknowledging this, and that Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia in some extent, but Egypt, Jordan, and Israel in this unusual and unique relationship they now have says a lot, and I think reinforcing that is what Mike Pompeo did today.
Well, I think he did, and I think you have to look at the roots of Egyptian civilization to realize this. Egypt was not a radical country. Egypt was one of the foremost provinces of the Roman Empire and was the granary and provided the grain for Rome. And even though there was a Muslim conquest in the 7th century, the history of that Muslim influence in Egypt has been one of great toleration and moderation through the years until we saw the rise of radical Islam and what it has done to the native Coptic Christian population. And now President al-Sisi is trying to go against that and to bring back the balance.
And we've worked with Jordan, with the Coptic Christian community globally for a long time.
That's right. And they still face a lot of danger in Egypt, but not from the government. They don't face danger from the government. In fact, the restrictions on building churches and all of those issues have really been tossed aside by the Sisi government. The new church has just been opened. Pompeo talked about that as well. A big cathedral opened by the Coptic church that would never have happened under the previous Egyptian government. So whether you're talking about Mubarak or, of course, the Muslim Brotherhood.
All right, we're taking a break. We're going to talk more about the persecuted Christians, but also about what's going on with the president's statement through his Secretary of State about a redo in the Middle East. It's a big issue. We've got a petition up to defend and protect those that are being persecuted for their faith. That is very helpful for our work at the United Nations and other international bodies. I encourage you to sign it. There's a number on your screen, or you can go over to aclj.org. We'll be back with more in a moment.
At the American Center for Law and Justice, we've been aggressively working in Congress and through our global offices, including in the region, to defend persecuted Christians. The Islamic State's jihadist army has been on a bloody rampage, profiting from genocide and tracking down Christians for sale and slaughter. The ACLJ is fighting back, aggressively advocating for vital international legal protections for Christians. We've mobilized our offices on Capitol Hill and across the globe, filing crucial legal documents to protect persecuted Christians. You can stand with the ACLJ in this life and death battle. Christians die daily at the hands of genocidal jihadists. Defend persecuted Christians. Add your name to our petition. Call 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or you can add your name online, aclj.org.
Mike Pompeo made a major speech in Cairo. Harry, let me give me your assessment of the tone of what you think it was setting. I'm going to ask Skip Asher the same thing. We just shared a little bit of that with our Facebook and Periscope audience, but I want to do that for radio. What was your sense of the tone of the speech?
Well, first, Secretary of State Pompeo's speech represents a stark and utter rejection of the Obama administration's approach and the Obama administration's rhetoric. So under the Obama administration, we retreated in the face of terror. We apologized for U.S. intervention in the Middle East. And we provided cash to the #1 state sponsor of terror, Iran. And so Iran has used those funds to replenish and restructure the weaponry of its terror allies, including Hezbollah and Hamas, and those allies continue to threaten Israel. In addition, it's important to recognize that the world is beginning to turn a little against the Iranian regime. For the first time since the Iran nuclear deal, the European community has imposed sanctions on Iran because Iran has meddled in Europe by killing Iranian dissidents. And so I think the United States is now once again providing leadership rather than retreating in the face of terror and a terror regime.
Let me play. This is bite number 3. This is Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State in Cairo this morning, with a great speech on what we're dealing with, but also contrasting the previous administration. I'm going to ask Skip and Jordan to comment. Let's go ahead and play number 3.
Remember, it was here in this city, that another American stood before you. He told you that radical Islamist terrorism does not stem from an ideology. He told you that 9/11 led my country to abandon its ideals, particularly in the Middle East. He told you that the United States and the Muslim world needed, quote, a new beginning, end of quote. The results of these misjudgments have been dire.
So here you have Mike Pompeo, our Secretary of State. Remember, it was here in this city, Cairo, he's talking about, that another American stood before you. He told you that radical Islamist terrorism does not stem from an ideology. Skip, that was, of course, a reference to President Obama's famous Cairo speech.
Absolutely. And what the Secretary of State just got right was the fact that in that region, if you show weakness, you encourage others to come against you. If you show strength, the evil withdraws. And that's exactly what he's trying to reestablish now. When the United States began to give money to the Iranians, who were the chief sponsors of terror in the world, the Sunni powers, who were our traditional allies, could not believe it. They were just were really befuddled, because here we were acting against our own national interests by giving the terrorists all this money, and that money has been used not only against us and the Europeans, but also against the Sunni Muslim kingdoms and the Sunni Muslim states in the Middle East. They don't understand it. We now are reestablishing our traditional role of support as allies, and I think this is going to completely reshuffle the Middle East to make and isolate Iran even more.
Remember, the Obama tour was called the Apology Tour. Let me remind you, what was the apology he was making, President Obama? Take a listen. Here it is from Cairo in 2009, Bite 47.
9/11 was an enormous trauma to our country. The fear and anger that it provoked was understandable, but in some cases, it led us to act contrary to our traditions and our ideals. We are taking concrete actions to change course.
And again there, this was the apology tour. We got hit by Islamic extremism in 9/11. greatest terror attack ever in U.S. history on U.S. soil. And our response was against our ideals. So, and he did this, overseas. He didn't make this speech to the United States, to Americans.
Right.
He made this speech to Egyptians and to Turks. He went all around the Muslim world and was making this apology tour. And where did it get us? Well, it got us to an Arab Spring, which turned into ISIS, which turned into an empowered Iran, and Iran in Syria, and Al-Qaeda in Syria, and the Islamic State in Syria, and the Islamic State in Libya, the overthrow there. I mean, it caused chaos. President Obama's policies and words caused chaos in the Middle East that we are still dealing with today. But thankfully, as Mike Pompeo said, because of the difference in how President Trump has handled groups like ISIS, take a listen, Bite 15.
President Trump empowered our commanders in the field to strike ISIS quicker and harder than ever before. And now, 99% of the territory ISIS once held is liberated. Life is returning to normal for millions of Iraqis and Syrians. Nations in the global coalition should all be enormously proud of this achievement. Together, we have saved thousands of lives.
So, Andy, I look at this reset. So President Obama did a reset, and that reset caused a tremendous amount of problem. We've worked, if you look at the countries we've worked in Egypt, we've worked in Israel, we've worked in Turkey, we have done work in Jordan, we have done work in Jordan, you've been to UAE, other countries, and especially when we've been negotiating for release of Americans held hostage, where you were trying to get coalescing support from some of the Arab countries that were supportive of getting these Americans released. But you look at the situation, Andy, as we've seen it, and it's a real juxtaposition here of two different worldviews.
It is. I don't. You say that Obama did reset. Obama really did retreat, because what it was a retreat from the principles that America has always stood for, and that is that we will not yield to the use of terror, the use of fear, the force, and radical Islam, the term which, remember, we were not permitted to use under the Obama administration. It was not recognized. There was no such thing. It was a failure to understand the fundamental principles that underlay what it was that the Prophet Muhammad was teaching, and we refused to do that. We basically retreated from our ideals, and we decided to do the things that were contrary to the American persona and the American attitude. We've, as Pompeo said, rediscovered our voice. In other words, the voice of America is to lead from ahead and not to yield to terror and to the scourge of radical Islam in any radical form of religion or of government. We've rebuilt the relationships. And this most important thing, we have rejected false overtures from enemies. Who's he talking about there, Jay? Clearly it's the Iranians.
It is the Iranian regime. So Skip, let me ask you this. You look at the two different views on this. You said during one of our breaks the realism that this administration is dealing with in dealing with the Middle East generally. But as you look at this issue, and as you see this, and you've got the situation with Syria where the president has said he wants a return of the American troops in an orderly way, but you're looking at a reprioritizing of the situation. How critical is this region of the world to U.S. national security?
Well, I think this is exactly that. It's the center of the world. When you look at Israel, has traditionally been viewed as the center of the world. And this is where various cultures come together. This is where three continents come together. This is an area that, if it is unstable, it affects everything else, primarily because of the oil resources that God has placed in that area of the world. So it affects all nations of the world. It's important that we have stability there. It's important that we have we tampen down those ideals that are percolating there right now. For instance, the Iranians come from the Persian culture, which is a very sophisticated culture, and they had this idea that they should be the dominant power in that region. At the same time, they are Shia Muslims. They're a minority. About 10% of the Muslim world is Shia Muslims, primarily Iranians, and they are opposed to the Sunni Muslims, who are about 80%. And what happens is we have a big fight going on between two factions of Islam trying to dominate that region, and they are destabilizing, the Shia are destabilizing the Sunni states. Those are our natural allies in that region. So we have to be there to support the Sunnis, but they also have to step up to the plate, and they have to be ready to fight for their own independence and against the Shia influence.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the truth is that we are telling the Muslim world, one, we will stand with you, we will work with you to defeat these radical groups, but we're going to be doing it with you. And Mike Pompeo talked about all these unique new alliances that have come together as well. And I think it's important to note those as well. I think we've got time to do that. Let me try to find that.
We'll do that when we come back from the break.
I mean, a number of countries that you just never would have thought working together are now working together. You've got, as he said, the Prime Minister of Israel in Muscat, which is Oman, visiting with the Omani leaders. I mean, that is a big deal and a huge change for foreign policy in the Middle East outside of just U.S. action.
All right, we're taking a break. We're going to talk more about the persecuted Christians, but also about what's going on with the president's statement through his Secretary of State about a redo in the Middle East. It's a big issue. We've got a petition up to defend and protect those that are being persecuted for their faith. That is very helpful for our work at the United Nations and other international bodies. I encourage you to sign it. There's a number on your screen, or you can go over to aclj.org. We'll be back with more in a moment.
At the American Center for Law and Justice, we've been aggressively working in Congress and through our global offices, including in the region, to defend persecuted Christians. The Islamic State's jihadist army has been on a bloody rampage, profiting from genocide and tracking down Christians for sale and slaughter. The ACLJ is fighting back, aggressively advocating for vital international legal protections for Christians. We've mobilized our offices on Capitol Hill and across the globe, filing crucial legal documents to protect persecuted Christians. You can stand with the ACLJ in this life and death battle. Christians die daily at the hands of genocidal jihadists. Defend persecuted Christians. Add your name to our petition. Call 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or you can add your name online, aclj.org.
So David on Facebook asked a really great question, and that is, besides Israel, who can America count on as an ally in the fight against radical Islam? Now let's set up the statement about this fight on radical Islam as well, because I think that this really kind of sets forth what we are really trying to reestablish here. Let me play bite number 4. Mike Pompeo again this morning in Cairo.
In falsely seeing ourselves as a force for what ails the Middle East, we were timid in asserting ourselves when the times and our partners demanded it. We grossly underestimated the tenacity and viciousness of radical Islamism, a debauched strain of the faith that seeks to upend every other form of worship or governance.
I mean, Skip, those are I'm going to skip and Harry on this first. Those are really strong words coming from Mike Pompeo.
They really are. It's refreshing to hear this administration actually speak the truth and to an Islamic audience, so they understand. Because remember, the Egyptians are endangered by the Muslim Brotherhood. When they threw out the previous government, the Muslim Brotherhood is one of those movements that is trying to impose the most extreme forms of Islam throughout the Islamic world, and most Muslims do not adhere to that, do not believe those things. So they are, even these Muslim regimes like the Jordanians and the Egyptians are endangered by these extremist Muslims. So it's when they speak the truth there, they're getting a lot of positive response because they are telling the truth, and it tells these people that we recognize what the true danger is.
Harry, how's your view? Because it's not just a reset, like you said, going from retreat. I think Andy said going from retreat to reset and showing, but calling this what it is, a radical Islam.
And so if you look at the prior administration, they pursued the elusive pursuit, let me put it this way, of an illusion. In other words, by apologizing for America's sins, President Obama thought that he could tamp down evil in the region. But it's important to note that the rise of ISIS came on President Obama's watch. He called ISIS the junior varsity team. He did very little while ISIS terrorized Christians and Yazidis, while literally genocide was being committed, and while the Iranian people rose up in the Green Revolution. In the brutal face of terror, President Obama suggested that radical Islamic terror did not really exist. This represents a strategic error by President Obama, and the current administration is reversing President Obama's policy, and that's an extremely important move going forward.
You know, we say politics has consequences. It has consequences on foreign policy as well. So fast forward to today and listen to Mike Pompeo talking about his Christian faith in Egypt and the Coptic Christmas. And I'll tell you why that was even more important. But take a bite. Listen to this soundbite 49.
This trip is especially meaningful for me as an evangelical Christian coming so soon after the Coptic Church's Christmas celebrations. This is an important time. We're all children of Abraham, Christians, Muslims, Jews. In my office, I keep a Bible open on my desk to remind me of God and His Word and the truth.
And it was a very important time to be there during the Coptic Christmas, because now the largest Christian cathedral in the entire Middle East, the Muslim world, has opened in Cairo. And guess who was there at the opening ceremony? President al-Sisi, to greet the Coptic Pope. So the Coptic Pope is there with the Muslim president of Egypt, opening the largest Christian cathedral in the Muslim world. I mean, that is how politics does have an impact. Politics changes everything. Elections have consequences far-reaching outside of just the United States of America, but all the way into Cairo, Egypt. Because I remember under the Obama administration, they couldn't even build toilet systems into the new churches in the Coptic churches, so that they'd be shut down because they wouldn't meet the codes. And that was under the Mubarak regime. And then they got the Muslim Brotherhood, who stopped protecting the Coptic Christians, and they were all being slaughtered in the streets by gangs. And now you have the actual leader of Egypt celebrating on the eve of Coptic Christmas, the opening, I mean, the pictures are there, of the largest Christian cathedral in the Middle East.
Of course, that's markedly different in Egypt than what's going on with our ally or NATO ally in Turkey, Andy.
Well, yeah, it's quite the opposite. Instead of the opening of the churches are being closed, the churches are being condemned. The Patriarch of Constantinople and Istanbul is losing properties to these so-called foundations that have been founded by Erdogan and his coterie of cutthroats, and that's because that's simply what they are and what they have done. So I hope that what we see taking place in Egypt through the influence of the Trump administration and its different policy that it has been asserting in Egypt will be seen also in Turkey. I welcome that and hope to see that.
I hope to see that too. Let's go ahead and take a call.
Yeah, Dave's calling in from Indiana on line 1. Dave, welcome to Sekulow Live.
Hi, Dave.
Hi. My question is I know you're talking about the different persecution of Christians.
Yep.
But I've been reading about this in Pakistan, where there's so much persecution going on, where a brother brought his sister into the hospital in severe pregnancy distress. And what ended up happening was that the doctor instigated over 20 people, including other doctors and the security guards, to end up attacking that family, and they actually end up kicking the husband to death. And yet, you don't hear about that at all in any of the news media.
Just so you know, Dave, we have an office in Lahore, Pakistan. That's not something a lot of people know. We have an office in Lahore, Pakistan. We operate in Pakistan, and Jordan works closely with Shahari Argil, who in our office in Virginia, who supervises that work. And it's a full functioning office, lawyers, investigators. We've been involved in a number of cases there, and what you just said, unfortunately, is happening all the time.
Yeah, it's very regular in Pakistan. Most of our cases in Pakistan, so you mentioned like that case, so the reaction would be then you'd have to figure out how to get the prosecutors to bring criminal charges. You would then bring a civil case against those actors as well for damages in their court systems, but you've got to get the government to act and arrest the criminals. So most of our cases there involve either working with prosecutors to get criminal prosecutions done, then we bring the civil case. On the other hand, on the defense side, it's death penalty cases for Christians. I mean, almost anything a Christian does there or gets charged with, the ultimate penalty is death. And they spend years and years in prison, oftentimes, even in tough medical situations, shackled to the floor. It is one of the most difficult regions of the world. It's outside the Middle East, of course. That's, again, South Asia. And again, one that the Trump administration has also been very tough on. We have cut all aid to Pakistan, 100%. President Trump said, you do nothing for us, we do nothing for you.
I think that's the right approach. Skip, you supervise our team up there, and this Pakistan situation is something your office up there is very involved in.
That's exactly right. We do everything we can, and we've been moving the ball forward. It's a slow, steady process. We've discovered that if you operate within the legal system, except on the most emotional cases like blasphemy or something, if you operate on the regular basis, you can force the system to do the right thing. And so that's where we're starting. But we always have to intervene on these death penalty cases. Otherwise, their voice is just not heard.
Well, that does it for the broadcast today. Let me encourage you to sign on to that petition. There's a phone number on your screen, or you can simply go over to aclj.org to stand with and defend and protect the persecuted church. These new policies will help that. But as you know, the ACLJ, we're working there around the globe on the issue of the persecuted. So whether it's in China, whether it's in the Middle East, other parts of the world, the ACLJ, they're front and center with our affiliates around the globe. Your support allows us, when we go to the United Nations and these other international bodies, to get the word out, and that's really important. I encourage you to do that at aclj.org or call that number on your screen. We'll talk to you next week.
At the American Center for Law and Justice, we've been aggressively working in Congress and through our global offices, including in the region, to defend persecuted Christians. The Islamic State's jihadist army has been on a bloody rampage, profiting from genocide and tracking down Christians for sale and slaughter. The ACLJ is fighting back, aggressively advocating for vital international legal protections for Christians. We've mobilized our offices on Capitol Hill and across the globe, filing crucial legal documents to protect persecuted Christians. You can stand with the ACLJ in this life and death battle. Christians die daily at the hands of genocidal jihadists. Defend persecuted Christians. Add your name to our petition. Call 1-877-989-2255. That's 1-877-989-2255, or you can add your name online, aclj.org.